Hey guys, welcome to our weekly live coaching session. I'm looking forward to it. This week we're going to be talking about how to find the limit of your race car. A lot of times I hear drivers talking about, I just don't trust my car. When in fact, what they should be saying is, I don't trust myself to be able to control the car at the limit, which is such a critical thing. Just before we get started, I would love to hear from you guys if you've been able to download our ebook that we launched this week. It's been really busy here at Racers360. I'm excited to hear your feedback on the book, and we're going to be coming out with a few of these. So any feedback you can give us now is just going to help us create a better book for you as we create them moving forward. If you have downloaded it, thank you. We appreciate that. But let's get into the coaching session for this week and what we're really talking about. At the end, I'll be answering questions. If you want to ask questions while we're live, I'll get to those at the end of the session. Feel free to ask away at any time. So getting to the limit of the car and how we do that safely. Ultimately, we need to have confidence as a driver to be able to control the car at the limit and be able to feel the limit. No matter what, we'll be in control and we'll be able to work with it. So how do we get to the limit? Really, the ultimate answer here is building up, firstly, car control. To build up car control, I really recommend going to different skid pad events. I think that's the best way initially to get that car control that we need. And you don't want to be sliding the car on a racetrack. That's not really the fastest way around, but we've got to be comfortable at the limit to know when we get that slide that we can bring it back and be able to control it, right? So skid pads are the first place that we should go as drivers to learn how to control it. Now, on a racetrack, we have to be able to step just beyond the limit and feel what it's like to be able to come back and know where we need to be. So how we do that? The first thing I do is I try to get to the limit or just beyond the limit on the exit of the corner initially. Typically, the mistakes that we make at corner exit aren't quite as drastically bad or potentially bad as they would be at corner entry. So what I like to do is kind of start working with attacking the throttle and opening my hands and just getting comfortable with the car moving on me, or under me, I should say, and getting comfortable making those saves at corner exit. Then, to get comfortable at corner entry, I try to be very selective initially on which corners that I'm going to really attack that edge of grip. And what I really want to do as a driver now, typically, I'm not looking at what's surrounding me, but in this scenario, it's a little bit important to pick the right corner to limit any damage that we may get or any possible negative effects of trying to go just slightly beyond the limit. So a great place to talk about attacking the brakes and going to the limit of the brakes would be turn 7 at Sebring. The reason why I say that is because if we start getting to where we're locking the brakes on initial brake zone, we can just get off the brakes and go straight, and there's some great runoff room past them. We can go back around the track. Certain tracks, it's a little bit more difficult to do this. I think of Lime Rock. It's hard to pick a place there that's got a great low-risk area for us to go beyond the limit and work our way back, because mistakes at Lime Rock, the walls are close, the grass is close, there's not many great runoffs. So you really want to start playing with this where you can limit your mistakes, and that's an area that's quite critical to this, especially, let's say, Coda has some great runoff, and you want to use that to your advantage and sort of play as a driver. And it's when you're playing and you're working that limit that you start to get comfortable at that limit. So what I would say to a driver that I'm working with on a weekend that's not quite comfortable at the limit of the car is I try to find the right corner to approach that. So let's take it back to turn 7 at Sebring if they aren't quite at the limit of the brake zone. So the way I describe this is in steps. I would say, okay, first, let's get comfortable at the limit on initial brake. And every lap, I want you braking just a half meter later, and harder each time. And what I want to do is I want you to get to the just locking of the front tires on initial brake zone, because that's the hardest place to really lock the brakes, is that initial hit. You have a lot more pressure you can give. Yeah, exactly, Jeff. At Lime Rock, Mossport's another good example of a tough track to really work on this on. So once we've got that initial lockup of the brake, we start to trail off. And if you need, use the runoff room, not a big problem at all. And once we found that initial break where we're starting to lock up, all we need to do is just take it back a half step, just a little bit. And that's now, we know we're at the limit of the car. So now we can try to do that every lap and start to play with, okay, I'm locking up a little bit this lap. Let me bring it back just a little bit, not a whole meter, but a quarter of a meter or so. And that's how we start as drivers to be comfortable at the limit of the car. The same can be applied to corner entry. You know, you start to bring just a little bit more of a lap to where we're starting to make a correction and save, or just missing the apex of the corner. Well, when we know we've got just a little bit more, too much entry speed. So we bring a little bit less, and we work on it on the corners where there's less consequence to be paid. And as we get comfortable in those corners of what it feels like to be at the limit of the car, we can make those adjustments, and then we can be comfortable everywhere else on the lap to be able to bring the speed in and still make those adjustments and be at the limit of the car consistently as drivers. Now, it's going to take a mental toll on you because you're having to always make small corrections, but that's how you get there as a driver. I know a lot of the amateur drivers look at professionals and they're like, how do you do it? How are you always at the limit of the car, always making those tiny little corrections? Well, that as drivers, that's what we learned. We tried to play with it and play with consistently being at the limit in some safer corners where there's less negative consequence to be made. And then we started applying that everywhere else. And then little by little, you start to build that mental endurance, that you can say. And if you guys have simulators, mental endurance is a great thing to actually practice on simulators. It's one of the few things I think simulators actually do translate well over to real life right now. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. Just to kind of back up, I think skid pads are a fantastic way for us to build up that car control at the limit, and then finding the right corners to attack the brake zone, attack the entry at the limit. So let's see here. We're going to go into a bit of a Q&A session, answer some questions from you guys. So I got one here on the Instagram feed. How would you go about practicing trail braking at a turn such as turn 7 at Sebring? So that's a great question. Trail braking into hairpins is such a critical corner. So what I would say there is, A, you've got to have a deep enough brake zone to where you still need the brakes at corner entry. If you're braking too early, your body, your mind's going to say, I'm overslowed, and it's not going to allow you to stay on the brakes. So the first thing we need to do is really find a good late brake zone. It doesn't need to be the ultimate deep brake, but it's got to be deep enough to practice it. And the great thing about turn 7, trail braking there, is because it's so slow and wide, you don't have to worry too much about the worry of spinning out, which is what a lot of people seem to be worried about when they're trail braking. So for me there, the goal is, as a driver, I don't want to be able to touch the throttle until I'm past the apex there. Now, as you start to really combine your trail brake and your throttle, that's going to slightly change. But your first goal as a driver is to hold just a trail braking is just 5% of the brakes. It's not a 30%. You're not using trail braking to really continue to slow down. You're just using it to keep the weight on the front nose, which is going to give you the front grip that you need in the hairpin to carve down to the apex. So as a driver, you want to practice being able to hold just that big toe, just a little bit of pressure on those brakes all the way down to the apex and hit that apex point, and be able to, as you get to throttle, open your hands immediately. You want to, the second you touch the throttle, you don't ever want to add more wheel. You want to be able to start unwinding the wheel. So that's how you kind of know if you've judged your trail brake to throttle well. So to be able to start practicing your trail brake at turn 7, the first step, find a deep enough brake zone to where you can carry the brakes down to the apex. Second step is immediately after turning in, you're starting to trail off, and you just try to get to that 5% and then hold that 5% until the apex. And try that every lap. In some laps, you're going to get a bit of a snap oversteer. It means you probably had A, might be too much entry speed, or B, you had just too much brake for the speed you had. We actually today released a little video on oversteer and how to control that, how to band-aid it, especially talk about weight management as a driver. Hopefully you can check that out here on Facebook or on our YouTube channel. So hopefully that answered your question there about trail braking to turn 7. Let me know if you did, if you have any more questions. Yeah, exactly. Knowing where you can risk it and where to play it safe, especially as a new driver on a track. We want you to be at the limit. We want you to get to the limit, but we just got to be smart about how we get there. So that's a really important part. And we don't want to be looking at walls. It's just sometimes before a session, when I'm working with the driver, I want to be smart about where we work. So, for instance, I was at CODA a few weeks ago, and turn 13, turn 15 are great places to practice with attacking the brake zone, but trying to release and turn in and just have that little bit of trail brake. Turn 15, it's so easy to brake too late there, have too much brakes on turn-in, and you get a snap oversteer as you get to the apex. And it's also a great place to time the throttle, time where your minimum speed is. And there's not much consequence there. You're not going to really hit anything at turn 15. So it's just something smart to keep in your mind. Not that I want you thinking about what can I hit or what may I hit as a driver, but it's just about getting the right mindset. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. How do you go about practicing brakes that don't want full brakes? Turn 1, turn 17 at Sebring. So the question is, how do I practice in corners that don't require necessarily that full heart of the attack of the initial brake zone, like turn 1, turn 17? Well, funny enough, turn 1 and turn 17, you'll often see pros have an initial stab of the brakes almost as hard as turn 7. And I know that sounds a bit weird because it's more of a momentum corner, you're rolling speed, but you've got so much downforce when you're at that high speed, especially in turn 17. So you want to turn in, you want to try to brake as deep as possible. You want a hard initial stab always, but what happens, the difference there is we're starting to trail off, and the biggest difference is in the middle of the brake zone. So if your brake zone has a high spike on the data and a normal brake zone kind of trails off and has that thick middle, turn 17, turn 1 have a much more drastic drop off that initial brake, and we have a longer, lighter brake zone. So that 5% brake zone's much more elongated. So what I can say as a driver in turn 1, turn 17, I would say we want to practice having your same minimum speed at the same point, your late brake zone at the same point, but I want you to work on getting off the hard brakes earlier, but then holding the brakes longer into the corner and having a longer trail brake. And that's what I would start to work on as a driver. And then as you do that, most likely you'll be able to feel like, man, I'm overslowing the corner. I could brake a little bit deeper. I could brake a little bit deeper. And then you're like, well, I can't really brake deeper. Then what you want to do is you want to start braking or start trailing off more and trailing off earlier, and that's how you work up to it as a driver. Really, the late brake zone is the last part of a racetrack that we really try to master, and that comes after you've kind of figured out your corner exit and your middle corner. Then you can start challenging the brake zones, and if you start making mistakes at the apex, you back that late brake zone up just a little bit. For me as a driver, I want to bring a little bit more into a corner every lap until I start making the small mistakes. Then I know I can back it up just a little bit, and I'm good to go. I know I'm at the limit. And you're always kind of playing with that. Once you've done 2 or 3 laps without mistake, maybe try bringing that extra mile an hour, 2 mile an hour in. Not 5 miles an hour, but just small little steps. Another question here on Instagram. Last turn at Road Atlanta is tough. Oh, yes, that's for sure. In the GT3 car, it's flat out, but barely flat out. So really at that corner, it's downhill, but then it compresses before the apex. So that downhill at Road Atlanta, the last corner, you really want to have a pretty early turn in and light turn in. And what happens is as the car compresses, that's where you add more wheel to get it down to the apex, because that's where you've got the grip. You don't have it beforehand. Same as at Lime Rock. Lime Rock, it compresses almost as you turn in. You don't want to be on the brakes at turn. You want to brake a little bit earlier. Get to that throttle just a little bit earlier, because at high-speed corners, you want the weight on the rear. You want the diff locked, so you want to be on throttle. And sometimes that means braking a little bit earlier. And that's really the big focus of the video we released today on YouTube and on Facebook, was talking about how you as a driver can get that confidence in high-speed corners on the rear. So hopefully you guys can check that out. Let's see here. What kind of data video would you suggest to maximize the benefit of one of your one-on-one sessions? I really appreciate you asking that. That's something that I'm really excited about Racers360 because it's a lot cheaper than having to pay for a professional coach to come out, but I promise it is pretty much just as good as a full day with the coach. So to maximize our one-on-one session, really, I've had a bunch of different ones. We've had, if you haven't been to a track, I have my own video that I can go over with you to kind of guide you through a track, give you all the notes, and we'll give you take-home notes. If you want me to go through, if you race cars, if you're a club racer, any video of your latest session, your latest race itself, what you could do is if you upload it to YouTube or Dropbox it to us, ahead of our call, I'll go through the whole video. I'll have some written notes that I'll go through, and on that session, I'll do a screen share video with you, and we kind of just go through everything. And I like to ask some questions ahead of time to see if you want a certain focal point or not, or something like that. You know, an hour-long session is actually a ton of time to get through a lot of different things. So really, to maximize our one-on-one sessions at Racers360, if you've got data that you can compare to somebody else or even yourself, we can use that. But really the best is going to be video or a mix of the two. So if you haven't been to a track, you want to learn a track, we can make that happen for you. If you want to review your latest race, your latest on-track session, that's really where we're going to be able to make a big difference in your driving. In fact, we had a good friend of mine that joined us for our very first session. He said, Dion, I'm racing. I keep coming fourth position. I want to be able to get P3 or at least P2. Well, we went through a one-on-one session. What do I say? He podiumed that next race, and then since then we've had a few more sessions with him, and he's making drastic improvements every time. It's really tailored just for you, and it's a really strong one-on-one session that I promise you're going to learn a lot from. So hopefully we can have you guys join us for a one-on-one session, and we're going to actually have a webinar probably maybe 2 weeks from now, and I'm going to go through what it's like to go on a one-on-one session and give you guys a feel for it. See here, we got one more question before we're done here. When braking for the corner, would you brake then downshift or downshift at the same time as braking? That's a fantastic question, and I would recommend, I've got my ebook out where I walk you through heel and toe braking and the timing of your downshifts. And I've got a whole chapter dedicated just to that. We've got a link on Facebook. I'll send out a link on the comment section of this. But so the timing of your downshifts, you want to have that initial brake, take a breath. Don't downshift right then. I know a lot of coaches try to say, well, you'll be able to get that blip of a downshift easier when you're threshold braking. But you have to blip so much more to match your speed to your revs. So initial brakes, take a breath. As you start to trail off that initial peak pressure, that's when we want to start our downshifts. And it's not a downshift, downshift, downshift. It's a boom, boom, boom. It's just a nice small rhythm. Making sure your eyes are up, because when you have that late brake zone and your eyes are down, everything's going to feel rushed. But you have tons of time in the brake zone to be able to get your shifts in. I don't know if you're a heel-toe transmission or if you are paddle shifting, but either way, the timing of the downshift's the same. It may just be a little bit longer heel-toe. See here, I was always told transmissions are expensive, let the brakes do the work. Absolutely. You want your initial braking to do most of the work. The engine braking comes later in the brake zone. It's not doing the majority of the work, but it's helping you along the brake zone. So, like I said, so timing the downshifts, initial brake, don't shift right away. Take a breath, start to begin your transition off peak pressure, and it's in that middle of the brake zone before turning that we want all of our downshifts to happen. Like I said, I've got a whole chapter in our ebook dedicated to that. Really, our ebook was about heel and toe, timing the shifts, downshifts specifically. It was about weight management, trail braking, where to look, and then we've got a little bit more in there for you too. I promise you're going to like it. So thanks for joining us on Facebook Live. I really appreciate it. I hope I can have you guys join me for a one-on-one session. Maybe watch some more videos on our YouTube channel or our website as well, Racers360.com. If you got any more questions, I'm always available on any of our social media platforms. You can also email me at Dion@Racers360.com. You'll reach me directly, and I hope to be able to help you guys on track. That's our goal here at Racers360. Make your track driving more successful and more fun and safer. So thanks for joining me, and we'll see you guys next week.